Hello, and welcome to this Advent Coffee Break episode. My name is Mark Paisar. I'm the Associate Director of Music here at Bethlehem Lutheran Church Twin Cities, and I am delighted to welcome you into the organ loft today to hear some wonderful organ music. We will have 4 different coffee break episodes throughout the season of Advent, so I hope you'll continue to tune in to our YouTube and Facebook channels in the weeks ahead for those episodes. As we begin our journey into the Advent season, I would like to share with you one of my favorite Advent hymns, Savior of the Nations Come. This hymn can be found in our hymnal, and it's number 263. So if you have a hymnal at home, I would invite you to turn to that page as we hear this hymn today. The text for this hymn comes to us from Ambrose of Milan in the 4th century and was later translated by Martin Luther during the earlier portions of the Reformation. The music, as we know it, comes from the Geistliche Gesangbuchlein from 1524. Now, this is a particularly interesting hymn because it shows how early Lutheran hymnody borrowed quite heavily at times from even earlier Latin hymnody. In fact, in early Lutheran hymnody, there was borrowing going on all the time. In fact, there was a practice that was called contrafacta. Now, what is that? Well, contrafacta refers to the practice of using new texts with pre-existing melodies. Now, normally during that time, this meant using a sacred text in place of a secular text. And so they would have kept the more familiar secular tune, but simply put a new sacred text with it. Now, this practice of borrowing a secular tune and placing with it a sacred text was done on purpose. It allowed a repertoire of hymns to be created that was already pretty well known. People of that time would have recognized the more familiar secular melody and simply would have needed to learn the new sacred text. It was a rather creative way of creating a connection between the everyday lives of the people and the new emergent Lutheran hymn repertoire. But we also see the practice of Protestant rewriting of Catholic tunes and melodies, again, going back to even earlier Latin hymns. And this brings us back to Savior of the Nations Come. The text comes from an earlier Latin hymn called Veni Redemptor Gentium. And the melody that we know in our hymnal was also adapted from that same Latin hymn. And so Martin Luther simply translated the original Latin text into German, and then a more metrical version of the original Latin hymn melody was composed to fit that new translation. So we have a beautiful example of how an early Protestant hymn was borrowing both from Latin texts and melodies. And in fact, we see this all throughout early Lutheran hymnody. If you look to the ordinary of the Catholic Mass, this includes the Kyrie, the Gloria, Credo, Sanctus, and Agnus Dei, we see corresponding Lutheran chorales being created in the earlier portions of the Reformation. One great example of this is the hymn All Glory Be to God on High, a hymn that still exists in our hymnal today. That hymn corresponds to the Gloria in the earlier Catholic Mass. So, now that we know a little bit about this hymn, where it was borrowing from as far as its text and tune, let's hear it now. So this is the hymn, Savior of the Nations Come. Isn't that a beautiful melody? And Johann Sebastian Bach wrote perhaps one of the most beautiful ornamented chorale settings of this tune. The beautiful characteristics of that minor key seem to invite us into the time of expectation and longing that is just perfect for the Advent season. Now hear these words from that first stanza of this hymn. Savior of the nations come. Virgin Son, make here your home. Marvel now, O heaven and earth. God has chosen such a birth. Let us enter into this time of Advent together as we hear Bach's setting of Savior of the Nations Come.